Good morning, everyone. Can I remind you all that this meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware that you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people want to watch it. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I'd like to welcome you all attending the meeting today and everyone watching via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones now be put on silent along with all other noisy devices. If there's an emergency alarm, as you all know, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. Now, first of all, we go to agenda item 1, which is attendance and apologies. We got any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Ray, Williams and Councillor Sumarza.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. No one has made any declarations to me. The reports are just in relation to taxi licensing. However, members, as you well know, declarations are personal to yourself. So if you do have any declarations to make, can you make them now, please?
Thank you. I will go straight into agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the Licensing Committee, which is on pages 3 to 10, including the Welsh version. If you go to page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and then we've got the Welsh version. Are there any matters arising from these minutes? No? Do you all agree that they are true record?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Well, then I'll hand over to Alison now for item number 4, which is the taxi policy update. The recommendations will then follow on page 16 on section 14.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just run through the report quickly. This moves on from a report in March of this year when you heard that officers had identified 2 potential updates to the existing taxi licensing policy that could require resolution, and that's prior to any other legislative changes coming into being. As you're aware, there are other changes afoot across the UK and Wales which may overtake this in time. The issues that we were looking at in March were that difficulties had arisen in respect of electronic cigarettes and the role in the enforcement of a prohibition of smoking in hackney carriages and private hire vehicles. And you also heard that the Institute of Licensing had published guidance on determining the suitability of applicants and licensees in the hackney and private hire trades, with the recommendation from the Welsh Licensing Expert Panel that all Welsh authorities consider the formal adoption of that guidance. At that committee meeting, you agreed that a consultation should be arranged in respect of those points, and that the results of that consultation should be reported back to yourselves for consideration, which is what we're doing today. In determining the consultation to be carried out, the 2 most significant issues we thought were that only 2 points were under consideration, not the full policy, and that these proposed changes mainly affected the trade rather than the public. Having regard to those points, a limited trade-only consultation was decided upon. 1 month was given for a response to be made, taking the view that the trade were likely to respond quickly if they chose to respond. And that's our experience with them. They do it immediately or they don't do it at all. In March and early April of this year, letters were sent to all affected hackney carriage private hire drivers, vehicle and operator licence holders, seeking their views on the proposed policy changes, and providing a form and a free post envelope for their response. That mail shot was also used as an opportunity to inform the trade of the proposed licence fee changes, as well as a number of other matters that could affect them. There was a very limited response to the consultation, with just 1 query and 3 formal responses. All of those responses were in favour of the proposed policy changes. So moving on to the use of electronic cigarettes in licensed vehicles. Members of this committee previously heard that a ban on the use of electronic cigarettes was proposed because both the legislation and the Torvine taxi licensing policy prohibits smoking in licensed vehicles. And in a recent court case, magistrates had expressed concerns around whether licensing officers could effectively determine whether a cigarette was real or electronic, making the enforcement of the smoking ban challenging. Should such a ban be introduced, Hackney carriage and private hire drivers would be required to leave their vehicles in order to use electronic cigarettes in the same way as they currently do when smoking ordinary cigarettes. The results of the consultation showed that this proposal is non-controversial, and indeed one private hire operator commented prior to the consultation that they thought electronic cigarettes had already been banned. A prohibition on the use of electronic cigarettes would require an amendment to paragraph 11 of the conditions of licence contained within section 2 of the Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles driver licence section as follows. Section 11, which currently reads, shall comply with the Health Act 2006, which prohibits smoking in any licensed vehicle, would then read, shall comply with the Health Act 2006, which prohibits smoking in any licensed vehicle, and, in addition, will not use any electronic or other cigarette substitute whilst in any licensed vehicle. Okay. Are there any queries or questions on that section?
Everybody happy? Oh.
Sorry, James. So when it says any other smoking substitute, does that include nicotine gum, nicotine patches? I think that's that could be misconstrued, couldn't it? That you couldn't chew a Nicorette gum or wear a nicotine patch whilst in a vehicle.
That's a good point. What we're looking to do is prohibit anything that looks as if they're smoking a cigarette. Okay, so we'll make that amendment.
I think that needs to be a bit more specific rather than just saying nicotine substitute.
Because we certainly aren't prohibiting the use of gum, and we'd encourage the use of patches to give up smoking. So yes.
Thank you. Any more questions, councillors? Well, the recommendations on page 16. On paragraph 14, 14.1, 14.2.
If I could just, that's the first bit. We've got the second bit yet.
To go through paragraph 7 onwards.
Okay, sorry.
I think we're all keen to move on, aren't we? Okay, the Institute of Licensing Guidance. You've previously heard that the adoption of this would provide clarity for licence holders and applicants, give confidence to the Hackney trade by demonstrating standards of professionalism, and also provide a level playing field right the way across Wales and the UK. And having spoken about some of the UK-wide and Wales-wide processes and procedures that may come in time, I think they're very likely to look like the guidance that we're seeking to adopt here. The results of the consultation shows it's not controversial, and given the importance of protecting public safety, if we do introduce this, we're not looking to introduce any grandfather rights. So what it'll mean, it'll affect all drivers and vehicle owners, etc., not just new ones coming in at the moment. But what we're proposing to do is to not look at everybody now, but to look at them in light of the new guidance when they make a new application or when another matter comes to our attention. Okay. Existing and new applicants may be affected by the proposals, but case law states that members must consider each case on its merits, and applicants will therefore be given their opportunity to have their voice heard prior to any decision being made. What that means is if this guidance does change things for them, they still have the right to come before yourselves so that a decision can be made. I think that the more significant impact would be on vehicle owners not already licensed by this authority as a driver or an operator, and we have a few of them that would now be required to establish that they're a fit and proper person. So we have a handful of people who may be more impacted than other licence holders. So the reasons laid out in the IOL guidance for that change are that vehicle owners are responsible for the maintenance of the vehicle, and vehicles that are not properly maintained have a clear impact on public safety. And also that Hackney Carriage private hire vehicles can provide a transportation system for illegal activities, such as the transportation of contraband, such as drugs, guns, illegal alcohol or tobacco, and people involved in or the victims of illegal activity. So I think that this is particularly important to us because vehicle owners may choose the drivers. And it's a question of whether you'd want a vehicle owner to choose a driver that could be then, involved in some illegal activity that hasn't come to the attention of the police yet. So moving on then, so we've explained why you might want to have a look at particular at vehicles in particular and the way that they're affected. But we've highlighted that, we've had the Rochdale and other abuse cases linked to taxis, and also County Lines drug trafficking is using children to move drugs around, and we know that the taxi trade are being used for that as well at the moment. Moving on to 7.8, the IOL guidance explains that for both Hackney carriages and private hire vehicles, the local authority has an absolute discretion over the granting of a licence, and we can and should therefore ensure that our inquiries and considerations are robust. The same process can be applied as for private hire operators. What we're looking to do is do basic GBS, a statutory declaration and consideration of spent convictions, with a similar policy in relation to suitability as the authority already has for drivers and private hire operators. Looking at the vehicle again in 7.9, looking at the questions you might ask if you were looking at this at a panel hearing, is would I be comfortable allowing this person to have control of a licensed vehicle that can travel anywhere at any time of the day or night without arousing suspicion, and to be satisfied that he or she would not allow it to be used for criminal or other unacceptable purposes, and be confident that he or she would maintain it to an acceptable standard throughout the period of the licence. Okay. So it's a very similar question of fitness that we've got at the moment.
With the vehicles, are you checking up regularly on their maintenance? Have they got a daily log? Because defects can happen at any point, whether it be a light or any particular thing. So if a vehicle is travelling at night or whatever, it can be defective before it goes out. And what I'm asking is just, are we keeping on top of the checks for these vehicles?
We are keeping on top of the checks. All of our vehicles have an MOT twice a year. Officers have been out and about quite recently on the taxi rank and other places where taxis congregate. By taxi I mean Hackneys and private hires. So they're looking out there at the moment. But this is a case of whether a person is a fit and proper person, because it's not just a case of us going out and checking, it's whether they are a fit and proper person to maintain standards each and every day when we're not checking. And in terms of the vehicles, this guidance would bring in more control over the owners of vehicles to ensure that they're the kind of fit and proper person that would make sure themselves that they were maintaining the vehicle each and every day, not just waiting for us to catch them. And also that the drivers they were choosing were fit and proper people themselves, and not just somebody who hadn't been caught yet carrying out illegal acts. So, because as you know, quite a few of the people who go through the courts, that might be the first time they've gone through the courts, but there's normally some history behind it that they've been doing that for quite a while. So it's a case of, making sure that the vehicle owners are choosing fit and proper people to be drivers as well. So if it...
Yeah, Alison. The officers, when they go out and check, they haven't got the capability to get in the vehicles, do they? They just check the driver and a quick look round, is it?
Was it the
vehicle? You said your officers went down onto the taxi rank, and what exactly do they check?
We do a visual check of the state of the vehicle, cleanliness, but also we check that the lights are working, that the meter is switched on, that the taxi lights are working if necessary, all of the plates are still attached and looking good so that people can tell they're a taxi. They check the tyres. And we have all the equipment to check the tyres. So it is... It is a visual check, but it's quite an in-depth visual check that will get quite a few of the problems that we find out there. Obviously, we have to wait then for the twice-a-year MOT check to get some of the more mechanical issues that might arise. Having said that, if we know there's a mechanical issue, if we can hear it not sounding right or anything like that, we have the right then to ask them to go and take another MOT test. So, if we have any queries about that vehicle, we will send it for a more in-depth check.
Right, I appreciate what you just said to me. The only thing that concerns me is, have you got in place anything, or is there any laws all over the country or locally where drivers do nil reporting?
What drivers do there?
Nil reporting. Now, PSV drivers, every day, as the law says, that they've got to have a little book or a sheet, and they check their vehicle every day, and they sign the bottom, there's nothing wrong, they put nil on there. If they've got a fault, they tick things, and that goes back to the garage or the owner, and then things are rectified. But if you've got a driver driving somebody else's vehicle, I don't think they're going to be as prudent as people that own the vehicle.
I'm not aware that we have anything like that in the conditions that they have to write it down. They don't have to write it down. Having said that, most of the operators do a visual check every day and do some kind of recording, certainly at least weekly, for any vehicles that they own. But we don't have anything in the conditions as they stand requiring the drivers to do a visual check. And bearing in mind, we would expect them to do so, but there may be 2 or 3 drivers for any vehicle on any given day. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt? PSV are very, very different to taxis.
I know it very well.
Yeah. And legally what we are required to do is very different. And so if Alison legally knows we have to do something, then it is done. And therefore you have those 2 twice a year MOT tests. It's more than that, isn't it, Alison, if the car's older?
Yes, if the car's over 8 years old, it's every 4 months that we do the MOT. They have 3 a year.
And so when they do checks, which you've heard that they do, they will listen to the engine to see how it sounds. And that's all they're required to do. But it is something that is on their radar, so to speak.
Justine, go on quickly.
I'm an MOT tester myself, and we check the emissions, we check the brakes, we check the vehicle over, but that's only checked during time of test. Now, if that vehicle goes outside after the test and the light goes, there's nothing we could do at that particular time. And I can see where Glyn is coming from. Gwyn, sorry. That a defect can happen at any point or any time. So if you've got 3 drivers, you know, it needs some sort of guidance for that driver to make sure the vehicle is correct before it leaves.
I think that this is almost what this guidance is about, is asking, it's requiring us to make sure that people are fit and proper people to actually make those checks, but it'll be the vehicle owner as well as the vehicle driver, and they may be different. They quite often will be. And it's about everybody in the system making those checks. Now, don't forget, we have 2 or 3 MOTs for each vehicle in a year. We have visual checks where we look at lights and all kinds of things through the year. Officers are going out and doing that. We also investigate complaints. And I would say that the trade are very quick to tell us if they think that somebody else has got a problem. And there are some customers out there that would also are very good about contacting us and saying, look, I was in a taxi at such and such and it didn't sound right to me, or it was, you know, when every time we put the brakes on, the brakes were squealing, they didn't sound good. So we do get quite a bit of intelligence-led investigations where we would immediately go out and have a look at that vehicle and find out what's going on. I have to say that you know, we can't see all vehicles each and every day, but I do have confidence that the vehicles that we have on the road are pretty good. You know, not necessarily perfect every day, but I do think that they are pretty good.
Alison? Thank you.
So thank you. So if adopted in 17, what I've said is if adopted, the guidance would replace Appendix C of the existing policy. With any references to Appendix C through the rest of the policy would therefore remain unchanged. Now, what you've had attached as the appendix to the report was actually, I'd attached the existing Appendix C, which is the fitness criteria for drivers and operators. And what I've now distributed to everybody and given you a copy of is the new guidance on determining the suitability of applicants. And it would be a straight like for like. One would come out and this would go back in as Appendix C, so that all other references would remain the same. So are there any other questions on that one?
Quick question. Yes, thank you. Can I just clarify, just so that my mind is clear on this? So this policy is actually setting that the owners check their drivers that they are a fit and proper person.
This policy is ensuring that drivers and operators are fit and proper persons as existing. The guidance slightly expands on how that is done, and it I think the most useful thing it does is it explains the types of legislation that will be considered as part of the fit and proper person consideration, rather than naming specific legislation which can become, you know, can be replaced over time. The biggest change, and the one that I've therefore focused in the report, is for the first time it'll bring vehicle owners into that requirement to be fit and proper persons. Now, we actually have very few vehicle owners who are not also drivers and or operators. So the vast majority of our vehicle owners we've already checked are fit and proper persons. We have perhaps half a dozen people who don't fall within that category and will therefore be affected, and they will now need to show that they are fit and proper persons.
Okay. Just to follow up on that, so it's a statutory requirement or it's a moral obligation?
We have a statutory requirement to ensure that we are confident that anybody we are giving a licence to is fit and proper. I think that the previous guidance that we had, and which is nationally, ours followed what every other local authority were doing, which was we were really focusing on drivers, because we have major problems with drivers potentially, and also with private hire operators, because they have information on, for example, when people are going to be away from home on holiday. So the focus on ensuring fit and proper persons was really focused on drivers and on private hire operators. I think that what this guidance is doing is saying that, you know, over the fullness of time, we've really begun to see just what an impact vehicle owners can also have as part of that equation, and that they're not being covered by the checks that we've already been doing. So this actually makes it very clear that we will now be doing those checks.
Councillor Mills first, then
Just a quick one, Alex. If you go to Annex C, on mine it's page 25, I'm not sure. Halfway down it's got DD90, Furious Driving. I've never ever heard of that before. Has that replaced something else?
Is that the...
Sorry, it's got a code of DD90.
Is that page 25? Which section is this?
It's the motor convictions.
Right. Ah, right.
Personally, I've never heard of that before. I just wonder if that's replaced something else.
No, I mean, this has been in our policy now.
What is furious driving?
15.
Furious driving, you can be cut up and retaliate against the person who's cut you up. That's usually furious.
So it's a new word, so... No, fine. Fine. Okay. I've never heard of it, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, got it. Sorry about that. And another concern is, talking to people out there, is, you say fit and proper people. Now, if somebody got a full-time job, outside taxi driving, they've got a spare licence, and a licence to drive a taxi, they do 8 to 10 hours per day doing their normal job, is there any check on, you know, because some of the taxi drivers work till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I've actually done that myself, but that was the only job I had at the time. Is there any check by anybody on the hours? Now, I know they're very, very strict on PSV. They call it other work. You're only allowed to do so much, and you've got to make a daily record of it on your tacos. And is there any check on the hours that's done outside normal work on the taxi drivers?
No, again, this comes to the road traffic legislation and it comes down to health and safety legislation, but both of which apply to, you know, working hours. So there's the working hours directive, although if you had 2 different jobs, that wouldn't necessarily apply. All of that would come in and would probably be a police matter rather than a local authority matter. As you're aware, tacos and working hours have been recorded are all a matter for, you know, heavy goods vehicles, etc. There is no legislation affecting taxis and cars.
Thank you, Councillors. Any more questions? No? We ready to go to recommendation? Okay. Right, members, page 16, section 14, recommendations. Members are asked to approve amendments to the Torfaen policy on administration and regulation of hackney carriage and private hire licences as follows. A, that the use of electronic cigarettes in licensed hackney carriage, private hire vehicles be banned. And B, that the Institute of Licensing guidance on determining the suitability of applicants and licensees in the hackney and private hire trades should be adopted. Are we all in agreement, members?
Yeah.
Somebody needs to propose it. I propose.
Okay then, propose.
That we accept
do
the
you need to vote as one? Is it all as one?
Yes, it would be
Right.
proposed second and then vote.
On both things, yes. Okay.
Then. As we've got proposer, seconder, can we have a vote of all those in favour, please? It's unanimous. We'll now go on to agenda item 5, which is taxi licensing fees update, which is on pages 29 to 38. Alison?
Well, thank you, Chair. Again, this is moving forward from a report made to yourselves in March 2019, when you were informed of the legislative process for fee setting and the guidance and case law that informs that process. I've attached as Appendix 1 to this report the fees that we looked at that time. Moving down to 4.4, that shows the number of taxi licences that will be affected by those fees, so the number of different vehicles, etc. Moving on to issues, and are there any questions on that? I think you've seen all of that information before. Yeah, thank you.
Can we just go through, just thinking, because it's the fees, can we just go through each point of the report?
Right, okay.
Okay, just to make sure, because we webcasted, everything is done.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So as you said, so Appendix 1 is the type of is the licence, and for each one it's showing the type of licence. I've put in the existing fee for that we're showing for this year, and in fact that's the fee that's been in place since 2015, I believe. What we've done this time, because we're obliged to for most of our licences, so I've done it for these as well, is show the administrative licence determination and the enforcement element to give the total overall fee that we're proposing to charge. So, as in 4.4, the number of taxi licences in Torvine are that we have 64 Hackney carriages and 169 private hire vehicles, and they're both licensed every year. We have 261 drivers who have a 3-yearly licence, and we have 18 private hire operators who have a 5-yearly licence. And on to 4.5, just to confirm that under the constitution of this authority, the setting of fees levied for licences falls to this committee for determination. So in March 2019, this committee agreed that taxi licence fees should be consulted upon. A statutory notice was therefore placed in a local newspaper, as required by law, providing information about the proposed licence fees and the ways that the consultation responses could be made. A statutory period of 28 days was given for responses to be submitted. We also sent out a letter to all taxi licence holders with a copy of the statutory notice, and that went out with the policy consultation, so they got both at the same time. I can confirm that no responses from the trade or other parties were received by the closing date for that consultation. Although no responses were received on this occasion, you may wish to consider previous concerns by the taxi trade. And these include that increases in licence fees place a burden on the trade and on fares, that the socio-economic factors and the competitive nature of the trade mean that fee increases can't always be passed on to customers, and that there are differences in the fees charged by neighbouring authorities. In August 2019, the contracts with the garages carrying out the vehicle testing comes to an end, and new contracts will be adopted in their place. Costs in respect of this testing may go up or down. The costs of testing had been included in the licence fee that we consulted on, but it's now proposed that vehicle owners will pay these directly to the garage. This is the benefit of reducing the invoicing costs borne by the authority and then recharged to the trade, and it also means that vehicle owners will pay some of the costs through the year rather than up front. So the fees in Appendix 1 have been amended to exclude this cost, and they're therefore lower than the ones that you considered in March of this year. But it's just the what's shown in Appendix 1 are the fees that you considered previously minus the testing fees that have been included. There have been no other changes.
Councillor Evans.
First of all, can you tell members where the taxis have their annual MOT? That's the first thing. And when it fails an MOT, is there a recharge for a retest of that vehicle? And some places do, some places don't. It doesn't state in that whether there's a recharge for that.
Right, okay. We currently have 2 garages, one in the Pontypool area and one in the Cwmbran area. They do charge differently for the MOTs, and what we did was we equalled that out. We kind of charged in between, so we charged people for the relevant number of tests, but at the in-between price. At least most of the MOT failures can go back free of charge unless there's been a significant period of time. So if they fail on a couple of things, actually some of the garages can do it there for them, or they can go away and come back, and those would be included in that fee. So they don't need to be paying again if they're failing a number of times or having to come back after a considerable period of time. As you'll see from Appendix 1, the calculated fees remain largely unchanged from before, and indeed those for the private hire operators have gone down. And this reflects the fact that the licensing team have sought to work efficiently and effectively in delivering both the administration and enforcement elements of the licensing function. In terms of the private hire operators, what we discussed back in March is that it also shows that the level of enforcement, and particularly in respect of complaints, has gone down. So the work that we've done, which was considerable, has hopefully now dropped off, and we have reflected that in the fee price. So it means we're charging less for doing less work. Moving on to 5.6, you'll be aware that there's recently been a Hackney carriage fare increase, and the maximum cost for a 2-mile journey has increased from £4.76 to £5.46. Although it is recognised that the trade can't always charge that extra amount, they sometimes have to be competitive on that, but they're entitled to if they want to. But it does mean that any increases in licence fee costs can be covered by the Hackney carriage fares for those vehicles. Private hire vehicles are able to set their own fares, and given that many of the vehicles are driven by more than one driver and operate for a significant number of hours per week, any cost impact per journey will be negligible. A cost comparison of our fees against those in neighbouring authorities is shown as an Appendix 2 for information. And members will note that there are some differences between the fees that we're proposing to charge and the fees charged by neighbouring authorities. There are a number of reasons for those differences, including that some authorities may not be calculating full cost recovery and therefore charging less than they're permitted to charge. And I think in 1 or 2 cases may be charging more than they're permitted to charge, but I'll make no further comment on that. The way in which these costs are calculated may differ from authority to authority. However, we are using the very latest available guidance, and I think we can therefore have a reasonable level of confidence in the veracity of our proposed fees. The work on which fees are based may be different. For example, other authorities may carry out a higher level of inspections or fewer, depending on the level of compliance in their area and the priorities for the authority. But we have charged for the level of enforcement that we feel is appropriate. And that's the amount that we're reporting back to you on a quarterly basis. For us, many of the underpinning activities and costs are the same, whether there are 2 licence holders or 200. As a small authority with a lower level of licence applicants, the charge per licence is therefore higher than for some of our neighbouring authorities that are sharing those costs between more licence holders. Nevertheless, the fees that we're proposing are in line with those charged by neighbouring authorities, and particularly with Blaenau Gwent, who have recently reviewed their fees using the same methods of calculation. Moving on to 5.8, members have previously agreed a reduction in fees for wheelchair accessible vehicles. That's currently £80 in respect of new applications and £70 for renewal applications. Members are asked if they wish to continue offering a discount, and if so, the level of discount that you would wish to offer. And I think it is beneficial in terms of showing that we care about wheelchair accessible vehicles and we support their provision. I said the discount would be beneficial in showing that, but any discounts which need to be funded and cannot be recharged to other licence applicants. There are currently 21 Hackney carriages and 6 private hire vehicles that fall within this category. The introduction of the Air Quality Taxi and Private Hire Vehicles Database, England and Wales Regulations 2019, shows that clean air is becoming a national priority in terms of transport provision. And I would just say that we are now being asked to do returns to a national body on vehicles because they're doing some work with vehicles. And one of the reasons that the Traffic Commissioner has talked about taking taxi licensing into a national body is that they feel that we haven't responded in encouraging electric vehicles. Now, for us, I'd say that's absolutely not our remit. We're here for public safety. But said it would be useful to kind of be seen to be moving in the direction of encourage them. There are currently no such vehicles licensed, although we have had a query about providing electric vehicles.
Councillor Evans.
The reason that there's not a lot of thing with electric vehicles at the moment, a lack of charging points for these vehicles. So therefore, most owners have to charge them at home, and there's nothing in the public really much for them to charge their vehicles.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably more a priority to deal with that before we need to look into the taxi.
Yeah. The remit of this committee is public safety. That's the legislation that we enforce. I think that our transport teams can and will look at the bigger picture in terms of providing electric points, and that's something that they will look at. What we've got at the moment is a large private hire operator who's looking at providing electric vehicles and has a yard where they would then be able to charge overnight in that yard. And I think that would be quite good. I would say, however, that the vehicles that they were looking at were quite expensive, because quite a lot of the purely electric vehicles that are out there at the moment are small and wouldn't fall within our provisions in terms of taxi sizes. You're not going to get 4 people into one of those plus a suitcase or 2. What they were looking at was some of the nice Teslas. They were looking at some lovely vehicles, but they were looking at, 60 to 70,000 for a second-hand vehicle of the right age. This is a lot of investment for them. But as I said, it's something that they are starting to look at in terms of the returns on petrol saving.
They're limited on their range of travel. So, the difficulty is it couldn't sail from the yard all night, because at some point you'd probably have to come back and return the charge. So it's going to be a different format,
Yeah, I think so, but that they will have a yard. I think that actually the bigger problem would be when they're undertaking long journeys and where they actually want the recharging points to be are at the airports. And I think because they're going to want to get to the airports and back, those are the long journeys. And I think going through the day, I think the other thing is that going through the day, we have quite a few of our private hire operators parking up in lay-bys and car parks and wherever there's a burger van. And some of them might have to go back to base to recharge during the quiet times. But that's what those are the considerations that they're looking at. And I think it's something that to talk to the transport team about. I certainly think it's coming for the future as vehicles get better. And as the vehicles get to have a longer range, and also as diesel gets more expensive. I think the price of diesel over the last 12 weeks has probably got even more of our private hire operators looking at electric vehicles as an option. But it's just something for members to consider whether you'd wish to we seem to be encouraging that even in some small way by offering a discount for electric vehicles. I think that's it in terms of the report. Just to let you know in terms of the implications, the one that is concerning perhaps us most at the moment would be the budgetary implications, simply because budgets are tight at the moment. I have had this through yesterday from our finance officer, and she has looked at the working budgets based on the existing numbers that we've built the budget on. And as you can see, that looking at what we've built the budget on in terms of assumptions on numbers of licences, etc., we've actually seen a slight increase between 17-18 and 18-19, despite the fact that we haven't actually had a fee increase during that time. But this would introduce this small further increase should we actually go ahead with this based on a like-for-like on last year. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you. That was what my question was around. This working budget of 95,785, is that the proposed cost to the authority of providing these licences?
No, the minus means it's income.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. The questions underlying that is that we're setting our fees on the basis of recovering our costs.
We are setting our fees on the basis of recovering those costs that are recoverable. There are some that are not recoverable. Those would include things like responding to FOIs and data protection queries, and the big one would be looking at unlicensed vehicles. We don't charge licensed vehicles for our work done against unlicensed vehicles, and there would also be some queries and questions that go above and beyond what we could legitimately recharge back, and that's what is specifically referred to as gold plating within the guidance and the Services Directive. And what they say is that we can't charge for everything that we might do, but what I've done is I've very robustly charged for everything that we can include within the charging framework.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's a very comprehensive answer, but what I was trying to get at was the costs of us of providing licences, not the other work that we do. I wanted to make sure that in setting this as a taxi fee, that the cost to us of providing the licences, that part of the work, is covered by the fees.
As completely and as fairly as I can achieve, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Just one, as unlikely as it might be, well, in fact, I think that's my question. Is there any chance that somebody's going to have an electric car that's wheelchair accessible? Because then I was thinking of how you do that. If it's not likely in the next year, then obviously we can look at it next year. But is there any chance?
I think regrettably at the moment the opposite is true, and that some of you may be more like I say, petrol heads than myself, and know what's out there on the market, but I'm not aware of anything that would take a wheelchair as it stands. I think actually we're struggling to get vehicles that were big enough to take 4 people plus their shopping. And I think that's why I spoke about the Tesla being looked at. It's one of the bigger vehicles out there, and it is an ordinary saloon car.
Councillor Jenkins.
What about hybrids? Travelled in one in Glasgow 3 weeks ago, and it was a hybrid, and I was talking to the driver, and obviously to do this committee, but he found it very, very economical. Is there anything in place for hybrids? Because you can go and buy one today, can't you? And they're very manageable.
We haven't had any applications for hybrids at the moment. Obviously, they've been around a long time. I would suggest going on my brother's experience, because he owns a hybrid, and I don't know what your views are. I think they're better at the long journeys, and I think that the reality is that most of the taxi trade would struggle in generating enough charge on the short journeys to keep them going. And I think that, whereas if you're doing a long commute, I think they're absolutely ideal. They'd be great for those vehicles that focus just on doing the airport ones.
I'll come in on it if you want.
Talking to the driver up there, he was saying that he obviously uses the battery. When he get to a certain, he had it on in front of him on the dash, showing me. And he said that obviously up in Glasgow they do a lot of local, like you said, local stuff, but they also do a lot of airports. So that's probably what he said, in getting their charge from the airport runs.
Also, there is a system up now, it's a hybrid, but it's a self-charging hybrid. So the technology is coming there, but these cars are very big at the moment, they're just a smaller version. But there are self-charging hybrids.
as I said, we've not been asked for this, but I take your point that we could include hybrid cars in the definition of electric. The one thing I haven't included in there are some of the LPG vehicles. And it's just a case of whether we would wish to, at this stage or at some future stage, offer a reduction to encourage alternate fuel supplies more generally.
Okay, any more questions, councillors? Councillor Jones? No?
No, it's okay. It's,
Right.
it's not an issue.
That's okay then. Yeah, before I go to the recommendations, I'm going to hand over to Justine just to clarify a couple of points, please.
Chair, could I ask, first of all, Alison to go through all the implications, because there are a number of them, and this is a fee-setting exercise, and what I want to show is that everything is being duly considered and that members can ask questions about any of the implications.
Is this from 6.1 on page 32?
So that's right, Chair, from 6.1.
And page 32, 6.1. Onwards.
But if Alison could go through those and then sum up, and then the Chair, if I could ask a question after. Thank you.
No problem, thank you.
Okay, so we've discussed the fees, and I think those are the ones that I think do cost have the biggest impact in terms of service delivery. Moving on to legal implications. This report refers to statutory powers and responsibilities. We have the. I can confirm that we have followed the most recent advice in terms of setting these fees. The most recent advice on the linked to the Local Government Association website, and which they are giving as the most recent advice, was developed via DEFRA in terms of animal welfare establishment licensing. And I can confirm that I have followed that. In fact, I wrote it. I actually wrote that advice, so I am really very confident that the latest advice is something that we've been using to develop these, because, and as part of that process, I actually discussed with the Local Government Association. I discussed with, it was the animal establishment trade, but we were discussing with the trade about how fee setting worked. We were discussing with all kinds of, with other local authorities. There was quite a big group sitting around there. So I think that, in terms of getting everything in there that's fair and excluding anything that's unfair, we really have been pretty robust on that. Okay. In terms of resources, as I said, the fees that we're charging are needed to cover the costs of actually delivering the service, and we've just put it right at that point. In terms of consultation, we've consulted with the trade on this. We've also been consulting with the finance team. They've provided a lot of the information upon which we've based these fees. They've also seen our calculations, and they saw the last calculations that Steve Bendel did, so they've been able to have a look at that. And this report itself has been reviewed by the finance and legal officers, and the finance officer has actually produced the figures that I've circulated round to you today. In terms of risks, there's a reputational risk in terms of local authorities being accused of always raising their fees. Just to be aware, we are also there's a risk that we could be judicially reviewed in respect of any licences, any licence decisions that we make. However, this needs to be balanced against the possible criticisms where local authorities fail to fund services or expect other people to subsidise services that we're offering.
Okay. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Alison. I do want to just dig a little bit more into the working budget for this year. Going on to 6.1, the first paragraph there. You state there that the 3 yearly driver's licences have mostly been renewed in 18-19, and few new applications are expected in 19-20. However, the budget actually allows for an increase in driving licences. So if we're not going to receive them, and if I just probably catch up both of them then. The second one,
Should I cover that point as we go along?
well, the next one's very, very related, and you'll probably be able to answer them both together if that's okay, Chair. The second one is no private hire operator licences are due for renewal in 1920. However, we've made an allowance for private hire for 36,120 in income, but yet we're not expecting any. Just want to, if you'd explain that, if you could, please.
Right, the 3 yearly licences, what happens is that we do still expect the new ones to come in, and we have a handful of renewals expected, but they are fairly low. But what happens is that when the 3 yearly licences come in, the income is divided over 3 years. So most of that income is actually the money we got in last year that's been counted in towards this year. In terms of the private hire operators, that figure was put in at the beginning of the year by Finance, and it is one that I am going to have to go back to them and discuss. But what they've done for the purposes of this is show the comparison with the previous years, so that you can see how the new figures actually relate. But in fact, we do get some new ones in, so we are still expecting some income into that box, but that is something that I will go back to them and discuss. But as I said, the reason for them putting it into this here was just that you could see a year-on comparison.
So can I just revisit that then, in light that you're not expecting that 36,000, which is more than a third of the budget for this year, are we still confident that the fees that we're charging are covering the expenses for providing the actual licences?
What we're doing is I have calculated how much each one costs to issue, and that's how much we can charge. And some of those costs are divided over a number of years. So, and some of those costs are the costs actually of administering here and now. It's quite complex how we put these together. But if somebody applies today for a new or a renewal of their operator's licence, what I have put down is what I have calculated it'll cost us today. And we're not able to charge any more than that. Now, because of the way that Finance worked out the fees and the expenses at the beginning of the year, they've worked it out based on previous years, which in fact we will have some issues with in terms of the operators' licences, but they've included it in this format because we haven't had that conversation yet, and they're showing you the year-on-year comparison. So as you can see from that, on a year-on-year comparison, there is a slight increase, if all else being equal, in terms of what we're charging the trade. And I think that's important to show that we're not overall. If it was the same as last year, we're not charging them lots and lots and lots more money that they could criticise us for, for profiteering or appearing to do so. But also we're not charging lots less where we'd be losing out on income. On the year-on-year comparison, it just shows that, that slight increase.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, the obvious concern is the differences between your working budgets and Finance's working budgets, which is an issue that we need to look at, and Council have assured us that we'll get a good chance to scrutinise that this year. And I think this is something which very clearly shows up some of the inadequacies between guesstimate and actuals. But I'm very reassured that that you're doing a great job in actually collecting the money that is due to the authority, and in the same time not overcharging our taxi operators. And thank you for that. Thank you.
If I could also say that we're changing the way that we do this slightly, so that actually the next report on next year's proposed fees are coming to you in October. Okay, that will include an estimate of the number of applications we're expecting. So what will happen is that that information will be provided and discussed with the Finance Department. So rather than them taking a guesstimate on what we've done in previous years in order to build this year's budget, they will actually have a much more detailed estimate from the licensing team upon which they can build that budget. So the concern, I recognise the concerns that you've raised. Those are discussions that are ongoing, and we're actually bringing in new systems and procedures to streamline that and to make it much more focused. So hopefully this, we'll be looking at it a lot better this year coming.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Okay, listen to the councillors there and your answer. So that figure there, 36,120,000, is it? You're not going to get any of that back in here. Why did they put that figure in? It says here, no private hire operator licences are due for renewal.
That's the operator, but you're quoting the 36,000 is the private hire licence, not the operator's licence.
Private hire.
We're not expecting any this year, that's the point.
What I can't understand is why they put that figure in.
No, that's the question I just asked.
I know, yeah, that's why I'm just backing you up on that one, because I just can't understand why they're saying that, and yet they've got that figure in there. Surely that...
The private hire... Sorry, I'm sorry about that. But the private hire vehicles are 1 year and there's 169 of them. What you're talking about is the private hire operators, of which there are 18, and none of them will come up because they're a 5-year contract. They're a 5-year licence. You see, I think you're mistaking the private hire vehicles, of which are 169 1 year, with the private hire operators, of which are 18 over 5 years.
Can you clarify that, Alison, for the members?
As you can see, we're predicting 3,900 income in terms of the operators' licences. Now, what we're saying is actually we're not expecting any renewals this year, but I will say we've actually got a couple of new ones coming in, so that'll be 1,200 off that figure, and we're only partway through the year. So with any luck, we will get some of that money in anyway. So looking through the Hackney carriage licences, we're expecting all of that money in because they're annual. We know what we're doing with those. Ditto the private hire licences. In terms of the driving licences, most of that money is actually money carried over from last year, and we'll have the same for next year as well. That's income that came in with the bulk of the 3 yearly, plus any renewals that fall out of that main bulk, plus any new ones that come in. The operators' licences, we do need to go back and talk to them about the number that they put in for this year. However, we're expecting some new ones in, so that isn't all. It isn't all a problem, that particular figure that you're showing there. Vehicle tests, that is very straightforward. That's money in and money out. And if the money doesn't come in, the money won't go out. Because that's on a straight recharge basis. So come August, in fact, we won't be getting that money in, but then we won't be spending it out either. So that's a straight, and it's the same for the GPS checks. That's money in and money out on a straight like-for-like basis. And the vehicle signs and plates, etc. We have a smattering of these through the year. We've slightly increased the amount that we've costed on those, simply because, just to recognise the costs of actually recording everything, producing the stuff that's requested, and banking the money. So that'll actually be, as it's shown, it will be a slight increase on what we've got, but that's nominal. As I said, the biggest are actually on the Hackney carriage licences and the private hires, and that's, that does reflect the fact that we're doing quite a bit of enforcement on those, and I've actually increased the level of enforcement I've allocated against those, because I think what was happening in the past is that we were speaking to private hire operators about vehicles that they owned and charging them onto the private hire operator's licence. But what we've done now is said no, the even if we're speaking to the operator about their vehicles, it's actually part of the vehicle licence, and we're charging it to the vehicle licences instead. So that's where we are with that at the moment.
Go back.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of questions of Alison, if you don't mind. Alison, in relation to the legal implications on page 33, when you calculate the fees, do you use the Hemmings case as the basis for that, plus any other guidance that is out there?
I've used all of the LGA guidance. That's all been brought into the guidance that I wrote for DEFRA, because that was actually just completing as I finished it. In fact, the Hemmings case referred to the Services Directive 2009, and the way that that requires licences to be calculated. Taxi licensing actually falls outside of that Services Directive, which gives us the opportunity to have more flexibility in the way that we calculate. However, I think that in order to be seen to be fair to the taxi trade and to the gambling premises, which are the other ones that fall outside of this, why would we do anything differently to the way that we're calculating the rest of our fees? If it's fair for one, it should be fair for all. And that's part of the reason that I've calculated the administration and the enforcement separately. We don't have to. We can all put it in as one fee. But, for example, it means that if we're doing refunds, we can very clearly see which bit we have to refund back to the trade. It's very clear and obvious from that. So, yeah, we've followed the Services Directive, all of the case law and all of the current guidance.
Thank you, Alison. Chair, I don't know if members have any questions on the back of that. I just want to give everybody an opportunity to comment. No, thank you. Chair, it's just the recommendations that I would like a discussion over. Page 34, paragraph 11 shows the recommendations, and there are two. I'd like to discuss 11.1.2 because this is to indicate whether a reduction in the licence fee in respect of a disabled access vehicle and or electric car should be offered. I suppose I have two questions. First of all, members have mentioned hybrids and other types of cars. Therefore, Alison, do you have a particular view about adding that? Because members may want to add that. Also, you're asking them to indicate a reduction. You haven't specified what reduction. Do you have any comment to make in relation to that reduction?
The first thing, in terms of the type of vehicle, is that I've mentioned electric as that's been raised, but I'm more than happy to extend that, should members feel it appropriate to do so. In terms of the reductions, again, it's for members to decide, but as specified in the report, the existing reduction is £80 for new vehicles and £70 for renewals. The only thing I would say on that, however, is that no, actually, I think that's still fair. New applications for vehicles are still going to be more expensive than renewal applications, and you may therefore wish to consider different levels of reduction for new and renewal applications. But that is entirely up to members to decide.
Councillor Evans.
On the second recommendation, we normally give a reduction for disabled. That's one. Now, if you're going to look at an electric vehicle, would it be a second reduction, or would it be just one reduction for the two items?
I think we established earlier that with the current market, there are no electric vehicles capable of taking taxis that I'm aware of. However, we could make it. That would be for members to decide whether you wanted to do it, a double encouragement, or whether you just say that they can choose one or other of the reductions.
Councillor Carroll.
That's why I asked the question earlier. It is, you've explained, it is extremely unlikely that there will ever be, within the next year, before we set the next fees, there will ever be an electric car with disabled access. So, I think we can leave that until next year, in at least.
On the other hand, there may be hybrid ones, but I'm not aware of any.
Councillor. Oh.
There may not be electric vehicles, but there may well be hybrid or LPG vehicles out there that are wheelchair accessible, if we're going to include that in the reductions as well.
Councillor Carroll.
Yeah. I would not be in favour of putting hybrids in here. There is a electric vehicle, there are no emissions. With a hybrid, particularly a hybrid that does short journeys, there will be emissions. I think if we are going to consider hybrids, I think we need a separate report. But once again, if there are no hybrids presently in our system, perhaps we could ask for a report sometime through the year so that we can consider it prior to next year's charging. I don't know how the rest of the committee feel about that, but that's my view on that.
Yes, just an observation with regards to that. I think the committee needs to be mindful of us overall recovering any costs that we have associated with collection of the licence fees. Alison's done a lot of work to make sure that that this is a cost-neutral exercise for the council. We have to bear in mind that any reductions, I take it on board at this moment in time, there aren't likely to be many, so it's going to have very, very little effect. But if we are giving reductions for certain things, those reductions have to be paid for somewhere, and it's likely that we're going to have to consider an increase in the overall taxi fee for everybody in order to be able to give the discounts that we're discussing. I think we need to be mindful of that, and we're discussing the wider trade, but I would certainly encourage the use and the future use of electric vehicles, but I feel that maybe that's a piece of work that we need to be doing over the next year or so.
You, Councillor Hawler.
I just looked it up, and in fact, Nissan do 5 seats and a wheelchair green electric car, so it is actually in production.
Does it say the price?
No.
It may be one of those that if you need to ask the price, you can't afford it.
Giles, if I could suggest that we discuss this when and if it comes into effect, because we can always put it in when and as we need to, rather than get bogged down now.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. You just read my mind, actually. I was going to say that the committee bring it up at a later date and we can discuss this in detail and just go through what we've got in front of us today.
If I just said, I've said earlier, I'm coming back to you in October with the fees then for next year, and that might be a good time for me to widen the discussion around types of vehicle available.
Okay, thanks. Can I thank the committee for some excellent questions, and I think this has been some we've really scrutinised this today. Can I go into the recommendations now? If that's okay with the committee. Mm-hmm. Right, so the recommendations are, I think we'll take it in 2 parts. Members are asked on 11.1 to consider the taxi licensing fees and either 1. Approve the proposed taxi licensing fees, or 2. Should they not approve the proposed fees, indicate the amended fees that should be consulted upon. Can I have someone to propose and second, please?
I'll move to approve the proposed licensing.
Right. Okay, can we have a vote on just section 1, those 4? Okay, it's unanimous. Right, then we go into the recommendations, part 2, which is indicate whether a reduction in the licence fee in respect of disabled access vehicles and or electric should be offered. Okay, those 4. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll. Are we all in agreement with taking out electric so we have a later report later on in the year? Okay.
So you are saying we'll do the same as it is now, £80 for applicants and £70 for renewals?
That's what's proposed today.
That's what members agree. And I take electric.
And that will just be for the wheelchair accessible.
Okay, Okay, then are we all in agreement? Show of hands. Yeah. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Pages 39 to 52.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. If I was going to say, as I'm aware, some people need to leave shortly. You okay? I was going to move on straight on to operational matters, if that's okay with you. What I'll do is I'll skip through each quite quickly and stop you then if you've got any questions. So in terms of operational matters, if we start with alcohol and entertainment, we've had 12 premises that we complained about in the quarter, and I'm talking January, February and March. We'll realise that because of the committee cycle, we're a bit late coming to you with this. But there's, we actually had more than one complaint about some alleged issues. So we had 4 complaints regarding 2 premises in close proximity to each other, each allowing a person in the Pontypool pub watch ban list to drink in their premises. Both premises denied the allegation and believed the complaints to be malicious. In terms of the other complaints, we had complaints about allegations of breaches of licensing conditions, intelligence from the police concerning possible drugs and underage sales and noise. In terms of the drugs misuse premises, they were visited by the police. Iron track testing has been carried out, and no evidence found to substantiate those complaints.
Alison, Councillor Hall, I want to just jump in a second.
Yes, all it is 5.11, the 12 premises. It says that both premises deny the allegation and both believe the complaints to be malicious. I believe there's CCTV that can be checked. I mean, if there's a report, is it possible to go back and check on the time? Because that looks cursory to my... that you've taken their word for it. I know there's more to it than that, but...
in these cases, and that's what... Sorry. In both cases, I believe the licensing officer to visit the premises, CCTV footage would have been observed if that was deemed appropriate and if it was still available, but they do have a right to do it after a period of time, so it isn't always available for us to look at. These cases are regarded as serious, but unfortunately sometimes there are malicious complaints that go on, and we are aware of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
As I said, we're looking at the other complaints that we've had on to 5.1.2. Just to confirm, the police have been back to any that we've had drugs allegations and done iron track testing with them, and complaints relating to noise nuisance have been passed to our colleagues in environmental health for investigation. And what would happen then would, if they'd investigate certain statutory nuisance notices, etc., if that's deemed necessary. On to 5.1.3, the licensing officer has carried out joint visits with the Home Office Immigration Enforcement team. They focused this time on late night refreshment houses, i.e. the takeaways, selling after 11 p.m. 3 premises were visited. In fact, licensing issues were found at all 3, but no immigration issues were found. So that was a nice visit where our officer got somebody to accompany them late at night, and she found problems and they didn't. We've carried out a specific iron track testing operation in the quarter, and 3 premises were visited and advice given on drugs prevention by the police. There was also a multi-agency evening operation in February in conjunction with the police and the Weights and Measures Office of Trading Standards. 3 premises again were visited, and 2 of those breaches of licensing conditions were found. Revisits have been undertaken by the licensing officer, advice given, and those problems have now been resolved. Just reporting on to 5.1.4, the implementation and enforcement of the Public Health Minimum Price for Alcohol Wales Act. I previously reported to yourselves that this has been taken on by the trading standards, although licensing officers will be informed. However, implementation has been delayed until the spring of next year. What happens is these regulations have to be laid before the EU Parliament, and another EU country has actually raised some questions that we've now got to go back and answer. 5.1.5, an application was received from the Home Office Immigration Enforcement, and that was to review premises in Pontypool. And that was on the grounds that the licence holder would fail to meet the licensing objectives because illegal work has been identified at that premises. That hearing came to yourselves in January, but was adjourned due to a personal emergency from the licensee. It was considered in February, and the decision was to revoke the premises licence. No appeal has been made. The appeal period has been expired, and actually I understand from the business that they're looking to change the way that they do business at those premises, so that has moved on. And I think he's looking to do a takeaway delivery service rather than have people going there anyway, so but we will still keep an eye out, but that'll be an immigration matter, particularly if he isn't licensed for any alcohol matters. Are there any other queries in terms of the alcohol licensing? Okay, moving on to Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing. We had 8 complaints in the quarter, including allegations of rude receptionists and taxi drivers using alleged drug use, social media use and a possible illegal taxi, all of which have been investigated and resolved as appropriate. We continue to work with the High East Transport team in respect of issues affecting school children and vulnerable adults, and we've been building new links with them to ensure that an effective exchange of information continues. In fact, just to say that there's been an office move at T-Line, and we are now in adjacent offices, so the links for checking things will now be even faster than they were before. We did have one of the complaints was a complaint concerning a taxi driver, and the allegation was that he was taking drugs, and he was also involved in doing school contracts. We arranged 2 drugs tests, but he was unable to attend either, and he then refused to, he informed us he was refusing to do so, so his licence has been revoked. And we haven't had an appeal in on that one as yet. In fact, the appeal period has gone. We had an application in March from a driver who had previously had his licence revoked, and his licence had been revoked in subsequent applications refuted by a neighbouring authority. Although the criminal record check showed no issues, previous police intelligence continued to be of concern. We therefore brought this before yourselves in early April, so this will actually show us one of the workloads for the next quarter when we report it next time. But the panel, decision of the panel was to refuse the application, and again that has now gone through the appeal period and we've had no appeal. We did have a query from him on how to appeal, but we haven't been informed that he's done so. The authority has signed up to the National Register of Taxi Licence Refusals and Revocations, which is called nationally the NR3. This has been developed by the National Anti-Fraud Network, which is a national service hosted by an authority in the Midlands. And what this will do, the NR3 register will provide a way for licensing authorities to share details of individuals who've had a Hackney Carriage or private hire vehicle licence revoked or an application refused. It'll actually help prevent drivers who've had a Hackney Carriage or private hire driver refused from going to one authority to another to dishonestly secure a licence. And in the case outlined above, this was just the case, where somebody was revoked by another authority and came here. They didn't tell us they'd been revoked, and we only found out by coincidence that that was the case, and we immediately revoked that licence. Now, what's happened since then is he's applied to both authorities for a new licence, but because we know about this and we're in communication, we've had that information exchange. But if you then went to another authority, as things stand, they wouldn't necessarily have that information. So what the NR3 register will do is make sure that there's a national register that we can go to. And anybody who is now refused or revoked or has been in the past will be informed of that.
Just a quick question on that, Alison. Those for the people, there's a national register for those that have had a licence revoked. Are we moving towards a national register for those who actually hold a licence?
Not at present, no. I think the Department for Transport in England and the Welsh Government in Wales are all looking at a register, but for all of them that register would be a register of revocations and refusals, which actually has already been done and is already up and running through the National Anti-Fraud Network. Okay, so moving on to 5.2.7. Just to let you know that the Cardiff Capital Regional City Deal has commissioned Cenex to develop a proposed ultra-low emission taxi strategy for South East Wales, covering the 10 authorities here. It's intended to include Hackney and private hire vehicles, and it'll be looking at the following outcomes: quantification of taxi fleet emissions, developing a total cost of ownership model to assess the business case for using plug-in vehicles, proposing a standardised minimum vehicle age and emissions policy, looking at recommendations for support measures for potential cost barriers in particular, and recommending a charge point network to support the increased number of electric vehicles that we'd be looking for. So this is information that's going on across South East Wales now. We're being asked for a lot of information. We're being asked to send information out to vehicle owners to get their opinions. I think that it is something that is very much the flavour of the month in terms of where Welsh Government are looking. But I think that you yourselves have just highlighted some of the issues in terms of local service provision and how that can move forward. But I think that when I come to you in October to talk about fees and talk about whether and how we give reductions for certain types of vehicle, how this project is going will be very much part of that conversation. So are there any queries or questions in terms of the taxi licensing matters? Thank you. So moving on. Gaming and lotteries, we haven't had any applications or complaints in the quarter. There was one incident where an inspection being done by one of our colleagues in the Food Health and Safety team. They spotted a gaming machine at a local food takeaway premises. And obviously the gaming machines are only permitted for use in premises licensed to sell alcohol for consumption on the premises. The licensing officer visited and gave advice, and a warning letter was issued, and that a few weeks later we still found the machine there when we went back, but we have now seen that that has been removed from the premises. So a bit of an ongoing issue with that one.
If you issued them a warning and they clearly totally ignored it, so what are we doing to stop that happening in the future?
I think that we went back a few weeks later and it was still in place. If it had been there months later, we would have been looking to take further action. But any prosecution would be it's very expensive to do that. So we'd want to be seeing long-term non-compliance before we took that route. And just to let you know, as you probably heard in the news, the gaming machine miscellaneous amendments and revocation regulations are now in place, and that cuts the maximum at the fixed odds betting terminal stake from £100 to £2. So I think this is really in terms of cutting some of the money being spent by those with a gambling problem. And that they were talking about delaying implementation until the autumn, and I'm glad to see that they've actually changed their mind and it's in place now. Okay. Are there any queries or questions on gambling? Okay. Moving on to some of the other things then, smoking in enclosed public spaces. We did have one complaint about smoking at the entrance of a public house. We've given advice on that one and we haven't had any further complaints. Street trading, we've actually had 6 complaints in relation to illegal street trading in the quarter, which is pretty busy in terms of complaints for street trading. One trader, we had a number of complaints that he was trading illegally. He's now applied for and obtained his street trading consent, so now he's legal. We've had a complaint about refuse at one site, but we didn't actually find any problems when we visited. We've issued a warning letter to another trade about future conduct, but they say they're acting as a roundsman and not a street trader. And we've had other complaints in relation to illegal mobile street traders, and investigations are ongoing to try and track them down. But it is very, very difficult to actually catch them in the act. And even when we know what vehicle it is, we write to them and say, your vehicle has been spotted trading. Inevitably, the response comes back, but it isn't my vehicle, I sold it, I don't know who I sold it to. So it is very, very difficult. But if you do see anybody trading who you think shouldn't be, if you let us know when and where, then hopefully if they've got around, we can catch them on the spot and actually see who's doing the trading, and that's when we can really progress those complaints. On terms of...
Councillor Carroll?
Yeah. Sorry, but the warning letter issued to one trader about future contract who states she is acting as a roundsman and not a street trader. Could you give us a bit more of a thing about what the difference between a roundsman and a street trader is, and have we accepted the fact that she's a roundsman and not a street trader?
Yes, a roundsman, for instance, on sandwiches would be allowed to go round to deliver pre-ordered sandwiches. Okay. What you wouldn't be allowed to do is to park up and let people come and choose whether they want ham and egg or cheese and cress today. Yeah. As I said, it's proving it, that's the issue. In terms of charity collections, we've had nothing in this quarter. For scrap metal, we did have one new application in the quarter, but that person was currently being investigated by another team for alleged offences. That matter is still before the courts. There have been a number of delays. So what we've done is, rather than reject the application, we've actually said, well, we'll put it on hold and we'll reconsider it once the outcome of the court case is known. In terms of animal establishment licensing, we have possible dog breeding going on, but that's an ongoing issue. Let's try to find it is the problem. But there was nothing else in that quarter. So that's the end of the report in terms of the types of licences. Are there any other queries or questions on the particular licensing areas? So just to say that in terms of service requests, there were 59 service requests in the quarter, of which 7 were freedom of information requests. We do still get in a lot about taxi licensing in particular and animal welfare establishments. How many zoos have you got and how many apes is the other one? And yes, we do have some funny responses to that, not all of which actually get made formally. In terms of the overall workload results, Appendix 1 shows the workload figures for the year, including this quarter. What I would say is there have been staffing issues that I'm about to come on to, which have affected the team and impacted particularly the proactive inspection programme. The licensing officer leading on taxis, scrap metal and street trading enforcement has now left us to undertake a 12-month secondment with another authority. And that started in March, but she also had a period of sick leave immediately prior to that. And it has meant that the taxi vehicle and operator, scrap metal and street trading inspection programmes couldn't be completed as planned. What we're now doing is trying to update that as quickly as we can. We've got, just to give you a quick update, we do now have a contract officer in who is absolutely excellent. and a lot of the backlog has now been addressed. We're getting all out there to try and address that. But as that develops, I'll report to future meetings on where we're going with the staffing. Just to let you know as well, to mention that for those of you who know our admin officer, I'll update you after the meeting on what's happening with them. Yeah. Right, okay, in terms of management matters then, we've got the Constitution report that is currently under discussion, I understand. Justine, is that, it's going to be under discussion. In terms of policies, you'll previously be aware that we'd agreed to look at the sex establishment and charity collection policies. Work has been got underway, however, because we've had the staffing issues, that is currently on hold. I am still hoping to get it to you in the autumn, but I'll report on that as the year progresses. In terms of fees, all the non-statutory fees that we were able to review have been implemented, and the taxi licence fees have been reported separately, so they'll come into place in due course. The collaboration is ongoing, no change there at the moment, and complaints against services, there have been no complaints in this quarter. Are there any queries or questions on that section? Okay. Moving on to the forward plan. This is a new section for yourselves. I thought it would be useful as part of the routine reports that we make to you to actually look at not only what we've done, but to discuss more formally what we're planning to do for the future. What we're going to be looking at is that the workload planning is going to be included, and we'll be discussing that with you in October in particular, so that for the year that's coming, we'll start to discuss workload planning along with the budgets, and to look at where we're going for the future. But if you have any comments or changes that you identify through the year, just say, well, actually, why are we doing that? Or shouldn't we be doing more of something in particular? Then that is something that we can discuss on the forward plans to look at how we actually structure the work that we're doing. We are reporting based on certain things, but that doesn't mean that it's fixed in tablets of stone that we have to do 20 of one thing and 10 of another. We can change that round within resources if that is the view of the committee that we should be looking at different things. I'm also proposing to look at a forward plan for yourselves in terms of the reports that come to you. And what I'm looking at is listed under 7.2. So for the first quarter of the 25th of July, I'm looking at a quarterly update. I currently have nothing else to come to yourselves at that time. But what I would say is that we could discuss whether you need quarterly updates, particularly in terms of the staffing issues that we're currently experiencing. So although we have a contract officer in place, there has been a shortfall before he came in, and we're still catching up with things. And certainly in the short term, it would help me if we could look at perhaps 6 monthly reports. So that's something for you to consider. In terms of the future meetings for November, I'm looking to come to you with, so that would be then a quarterly, an update report coming to you, because that would be part of the discussion around workloads for the coming year. We'd start to look at the taxi licence fees for consultation, because we need to get those in good and early, and I'm hoping to bring the first drafts of the sex establishment and charity collection policies to yourselves. And then in February, we will be discussing, perhaps a quarterly update again, the taxi licence fee consultation response, so you can actually agree the taxi licence fees at that time. We'd also be looking at the general licence fees, and we also need to start on amending the licensing policy under the Licensing Act 2003 at that time. And then in early May, we'd be coming to you a quarterly report and end-of-year report, and perhaps at this stage with the 6 establishments and charity collection policies for approval, if we've had the staff resources to do that. So that's what I'm proposing for yourselves in terms of the workload over the coming year, and I'm happy to listen to any other suggestions or reports that you'd like, or things that you don't think are necessary. Okay.
I'd just like to say that I'm quite happy to go to 6 monthly updates if that makes life easier for you guys if you're struggling. I don't see an issue with that at all.
My suggestion is we drop July and February, because they're the obvious ones. We've got to have May, so November the 14th would be the... Because we've just had one. Do we want another one in July if we're going to go to Albion?
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Parish?
If there were difficulties, though, would you bring that back to us quarterly, please, rather than wait 6 months? Do you know what I mean? If there was something that you were concerned about.
I think it just depends on how many reports there are going to be, because what you don't want is to have, a 6 monthly meeting and then to have, 5 or 6 reports, because we'll be here all day if that's the case. So could you just pencil in, 4 at the moment, and then leave it to officers to make the decision as to what reports there are? Because, yes, if there's one report and then there's the updates, yes, perhaps that can be put back. So if it could just be left to the judgment of Addison and the team, that would be appreciated, members.
Thank you, Constance. Thank you, Alison. Can I thank you as well for your excellent work, you and your team. I know that you're understaffed at the moment, and you've done an outstanding job and a very comprehensive report as well. So thank you for that. I'll go into recommendations, which is on page 46, section 11, that the committee notes the activity report for this quarter, and that the committee note and comment on the contents of this report. Can I have a proposal seconder? Thank you. All agreement?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All that's left now is the date of the next meeting.
Yes, Chair, at the moment I think that's down for the 25th of July, but I believe we're going to review that close to the time.
Okay, thank you. On that, I'll close the meeting. Thanks a lot for your attendance.